Because you all are located exactly where now?
We're in Knoxville right now, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay.
But our work it goes throughout the region, so we're always on the road and in other places as well.
Right. Good God. Good God. Wait. You all doing a mighty work, I can tell you that.
I'll give you like a quick spiel about us, and then we can
Sure.
get right into it. That way, you kind of understand or have some idea about what we do. We have an organization and project called Black in Appalachia, and so we work. I guess we're going into our 11th year now, and the work really has been came out of East Tennessee PBS, where we're at right now, as a way to document and make available Black life and narratives in the Mountain South. And so we do that through all kinds of ways. And we say the Mountain South, but we also work in Pittsburgh and southeastern Ohio, down to Birmingham, which is part of the Appalachian region as well. So we do short documentary films. We do census data collection, basically everything that we can to help like flush out and quilt together these Black narratives that people don't assume exist here in the Appalachian region, right? It's a region framed by kind of a homogeneous whiteness, but it's not true. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
That's
we do a
beautiful.
lot of work,
That's
Awesome.
beautiful.
and the podcast is part of that. The most popular thing that we do is the podcast. So,
Of course, it's the most popular thing we do because I'm doing it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
We'll go ahead and get started. If you're ready to go, we're ready to go.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll get things kicked off. And so I want to talk a little bit about this whole decision to run. Right, we know you as a public intellectual, a philosopher, a scholar of religion, and so this run for presidency is sort of something that we're excited to see, but also kind of wondering where did it come from. So we want to ask a little bit about that, like what's the origins of this decision, and if you can talk a little bit about the switch from the People's Party to the Green Party.
Right. No. Well, first, I'd like to begin by saluting both of you and all of those who work with you, because you all are a force for good. And in some ways, I'm just so glad that you get more and more and more spotlight for the witness that you are bearing. Because people think of Appalachia, they think of a stereotype. You think of a white brother or white sister, Jed, Jessica, or something like that. You say, well, there's a whole lot of precious human beings in Appalachia. And in fact, many of them are Black, and Blackness comes in a variety of different forms and flavors and vibrations. And being Black in Appalachia is just as Black as being Black on the south side of Chicago or in Harlem or in Compton, Los Angeles. And so that just to be able to be part of this conversation, I know Bell Hooks, my very, very dear sister, who I work closely with and wrote books, she was deeply into reflecting on Black experiences in Appalachia. And my best friend in the world, Jim Washington, who passed in 1997, who grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Yeah. He was the only one that Coretta Scott King allowed to collect Martin Luther King Jr.'s works in Testament of Hope. He wrote a great book called Frustrated Fellowship on the history of Black Baptists, which is religion of the Black masses at the turn of the century, which is my own denominational tradition. And I loved him like a brother. He'd take a bullet for me, and I would take a bullet for him. Each time I think of Knoxville, I think of James Melvin Washington. And in fact, that has everything to do with my running for president, because I've always felt that I have a distinctive calling to engage in a fallible quest for truth and a painful yet joyful quest for justice. And I never thought that it would spill over into electoral politics. But electoral politics is just one site. It's just another context for the same struggle. The same struggle. And that fundamentally has to do with how do we come up with investing all that we have intellectually, spiritually, morally, politically to empower the least of these. I come right out of the 25th chapter of Matthew. How do we empower poor people, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation? How do we empower working people, no matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation? And it's a matter of trying to raise one's voice. So in that sense, it's not in any way a normal political campaign. It's really a kind of call for spiritual awakening, moral reckoning, political witnessing for poor and working people, because I'm thoroughly convinced that neither Democrats or Republicans put poor and working people at the center of what they're about. They're too tied to corporation, too tied to Wall Street, too tied to Pentagon, too tied to military expansionism. And when it comes to poor and working people, it's just an afterthought, a little window dressing, especially every 2 and 4 years during the election, you see. And so I began with the People's Party. I give them credit because they're the ones who came forward, put it on my mind. And then I decided to shift to the Green Party because of one, we've got institutional capacity. The People's Party only had one state. The Green Party already has nearly 20, and we can get 41. And then the People's Party also had a certain internal struggle that was going on, that I didn't want to serve as a distraction, but I always give them and the volunteers credit for extending me the invitation. But I just got to stay on the move, keep the focus where it belongs, which is the social misery and suffering, but also the joy and the style and the smiles of poor and working people. Now, I begin on the chocolate side of town because my mama's chocolate, and my dad is chocolate, and my church, Shiloh Baptist Church, is chocolate, and Curtis Mayfield and Aretha's chocolate. And these are the folk that have fed most deeply into shaping who I am. But I've always had a universal embrace, my vanilla brothers and sisters, all colors, because each and every one of them are precious in the sight of the God that I serve.
You touched on this, but the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is a federal commission, was created in 1969 and designated the Appalachian region from Pittsburgh down to Birmingham, northern Mississippi. And that designation was based largely on poverty rates, geography and poverty rates. So as you know, this region has also been classified as Trump country as well, right? Which ignores a lot of our own social movements that have come out of this region. How do you see your work and your campaign kind of lifting up this other narrative in regards to poor and working class people in a region that's been classified by outsiders as these things, poverty-stricken, Trump country, so on and so forth? The labels will continue, but how do you see this space that you're creating as a way to address some of these things?
Well, what sits at the very center of my campaign is the abolition of poverty. See, I come out of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it was poverty, militarism, materialism, and forms of racism that was sucking the best out of the American democratic experiment. I think he's absolutely right. Fannie Lou Hamer said the same thing. She is absolutely right. So I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty across the board. I don't think there ought to be one poor person in America, unless they're nuns or people who have vows of poverty that have a certain kind of spiritual discipline. But most people want to get out of poverty. And so I think when I think of Trump country, you see, I don't see stereotypes. I see brothers and sisters, largely white brothers and sisters, who are hurting, who are frustrated, who are looking for a way out. And many of them, not all, but many of them choose a Pied Piper who himself is tied to Wall Street, who himself is tied to military expansionism. So he misleads them because he makes them think he's the only one who cares. No, I have a deep care and concern for poor people, working people, no matter what color they are. And you see, I don't hate Trump. I don't hate Trump's followers, and his followers are very diverse. 1 out of 9 of those who supported Trump supported my dear brother Bernie Sanders when he ran for president in the primaries. You got a lot of different kind of folk who supported Trump. I don't hate them, but I hate Trump's gangster activity. See, I hate demonizing people as rapists and criminals when he talks about immigrants. When he talks about the black men and calling them sons of bitches in relation to Colin Kaepernick. I don't have any patience for that at all. But the same is true the other ways. I don't believe we ought to be degrading and putting down white brothers and sisters just because they're white. No, that's not right. And for me, it's not Christian. I don't live my life like that. And I don't roll like that. That's not how I was raised and reared. There's a sanctity, there's a dignity in everybody. You just got to find it and tease it out. And so when I go into Trump country, I'm going in as just another brother, another chocolate brother, trying to connect with my other brothers and sisters, most of them vanilla. And I hope when they see me, I hope they don't see a stereotype. When I see them, I'm not seeing a stereotype. I know they got a mama and a daddy just like me. They got cousins just like me. They've got hurts and insecurities and wounds just like me. Not exactly on the same economic level, because I'm a professor, so I got more cash flow than large numbers of them. I want them to have more cash flow. But I got the same dignity as they have. They have the same dignity as I have, because it's given by God that's greater than all of us. That's my tradition. I'm going to be true to that tradition. And so it's going to cut against the grain. A lot of people don't understand. They can just see Democrats. They can just see Republicans. They could just see progressive. They could just see conservatives. Well, you see, those are the labels that for me too often get in the way. And so there's got to be a human to human, soul to soul, eye to eye. I want to look them in the eye. You know what I mean? The eyes are the windows of the soul. I want to connect with their humanity. We may still end up disagreeing. Hey, that's cool. A lot of people disagree. That's part of life, But I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I want you to understand the legacy of Martin King. I want you to understand the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. Miles Horton. Oh, my dear brother. We know Miles Horton, the founder of Highland Center. That was that institution that had Rosa Parks already there 3 months before she decided to go back to Montgomery and sit down on a bus in order to stand up for justice. Stokely Carmichael was there. Diane Nash was there. Martin King was there. His wife, Zelphia, co-wrote "We Shall Overcome." Y'all know that.
Right down the road.
Co-wrote the song. That's the freedom anthem. And what does that mean? What that means is, and I'll tell my white brothers and sisters, you see, I'm not even I'm not even into this talk about white allies. See, I don't like the idea of just an ally who could just come in and from the outside and be extraneous. It's like Bill Evans and Miles Davis's sextet. He got a white brother on the piano. He ain't no ally. He's in the band. He's part of the collectivity. A Sly Stone got a white brother playing the drums called Greg. Greg is not a white ally, and Sly and the Family Stone with Cynthia Robinson on the trumpet and Larry Graham on the bass and Sly playing the organ. They all in the band. See, when I go to any white context, I go to my white brother and sister in Appalachia, whatever color. I just want you to come on and join the band. And once you join the band, it's not, we'll now have the white ally Bill Evans play his solo after. No, he's in the motherfucking band. And when you get in the band, that's solidarity. And everybody's still individual, and you can disagree, and you can still connect with each other. You can have both love. You can have a certain kind of dislike. That's part of what it is to be in the band. You're Mary Lou Williams' band. She got all kind of different colors in that band. She's a black sister who's running it, but she's got all kind of different voices. But that freedom struggles are like that. And you all know better than I in the Appalachian context what I'm talking about. You got some white brothers and sisters who are trustworthy, full of integrity, honesty, decency. They are in your band. You don't look at them and say, oh, I got a white ally. And it cuts the other way with Clarence in Bruce Springsteen's band. He's a black brother. He ain't no black ally with Bruce Springsteen. That's his brother. They in the East Street band together. He passed, as you know. And, Bruce was hit so hard. But we're talking about humanity. We're talking about something that cuts deep. But that's the very thing that has kept all of us going, no matter who we are as human beings.
These communities, poor communities, right, that are the center of your campaign, and we think about our environmental struggles that we're facing today with climate change and everything else, when we think about the lack of environmental resources, when we think about protection against the sort of disparate impact of environmental disasters, right? They happen to poor communities, to Black communities, to communities of color, right? We are in a climate changing world. Talk to us a little bit about your plans for addressing climate change and the sort of the impact that it will have on poor communities, Black communities, communities of color here in our region, but beyond, right, in the country and in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think so much of the ecological collapse connected to pollution and carbonization of the air has to do with corporate greed. I think it has to do with their indifference to the needs of people as opposed to they being addicted to profits, always putting money first over long-term quality of life as opposed to just short-term access to profit. And so you have to be able to galvanize and mobilize people in the name of both light, which is your analysis, it gets them to see the world a different way, but also love, which is what justice is all about. Justice is what love looks like in public. And so your deep care and concern for people. And we got to convince, and the only way you do that is then bring power and pressure to bear on the corporate elites, on the corporations, the fossil fuel industries and so forth, that will always put profit ahead of people. And it's a very, very sad fact and a sad truth. But if poor people and working people do not come together and form the strong solidarity, that the profits will engage in their short-term profit maximizing. The corporations will engage in this short-term profit maximizing. And a lot of this also has to do with a major shift of resources from military-industrial complex into various kinds of efforts to ensure each citizen having access to Medicare, for Medicare for all across the board, quality schools, jobs with a living wage. I'm deeply committed to the best of the trade union movement, best of the trade union tradition, those who are fundamentally committed to empowering working people. I mean, a lot of times you get trade union leaders themselves who are willing to make deals with the corporate elites and make that too often a impediment for the empowerment of workers. But this is true in every community. You know, I struggle with this in the Black community. We got a whole lot of Black leaders who make premature compromises that end up benefiting just the Black middle class. And it doesn't really connect with Black working people and Black poor people. This is why we've had indifference to mass incarceration, which I think is a crime against humanity. And Brother Joe Biden was one of the architects of it. He was proud of it. Well, I think mass incarceration is a crime against humanity. I've taught in prisons for 41 years. I've seen what the effects and consequences are. But that's because one is concerned only with a small group, the Black middle class. It hasn't been a focus on precious Black poor people. But trade unions can do the same thing. If they have trade union leaders must focus fundamentally on their workers. And too often they make premature compromises. You see, they become what they used to call business unionism rather than people's unionism. It's going to be a real test at the end of July with this strike that looks as if it's going to take place against UPS. We're going to see which side people take, especially these politicians. Because some of these politicians, Democratic Party, can talk a nice little game about their commitment to poor people and working people. But when it's time to meet the test, they are as weak as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid. I'm telling you, where's the backbone? Where's your spine? I thought you was concerned about Jamal and Letitia and Jethro and Jessica and Jose and Juanita. No, you're not. No, you're concerned about your middle-class friends.
You talked about the long haul and how a lot of these issues we face particularly are around people, the kind of short-sightedness and immediate corporate greed and things like that. In looking at the long haul, I'm going to assume that your candidacy is going to excite a lot of young people. There's going to be a lot of young youth in our country who are voting for the first or second time that are going to be really excited to have that space and hear the things that are going to resonate with them in their lives. In that context, how do we, and you've seen this before, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, like how do we not only engage these young people, these new first and second year voters, but keep them engaged? How do you see that we keep these young people from becoming disillusioned in the political process and retain them, as they say, for on into the future?
Both of you all already asking such wonderful questions. I've been interviewed a zillion times since my announcement. And you all got some of the highest quality questions because they get right to the core of really what the campaign is all about. Because see, the campaign is really just a moment in a movement. You see, the campaign, the end and aim of the campaign is not about me, the candidate. Not at all. You see, I'm a jazz man. And jazz ain't never about just one person. It's always about the collectivity trying to give to the people. You see, if Duke Ellington's band or Sarah Vaughan is not focused on empowering the people, she's not part of the best of the jazz tradition. And so the campaign is just like the Black musical tradition spilling over in electoral politics. That's simply saying, how do you lift your voice? How do you deal with the blues, which is about catastrophe? How do you keep the swing in it? Because swing is about a conception of time that allows you to have a future that people are saying is impossible. People are saying give up on it. People are saying cave in. People are saying sell out. No, we have a conception of the future that can't be seen at the moment, but is at work in our movement. That's Black music. And then there's improvisation. You got to be flexible. You got to be fluid. Can't be dogmatic. Can't be doctrinaire. You got to learn how to listen to the people. You got to be humble enough to learn from the people, you see. And so in that sense, I'm saying to young folk, this is one moment in a movement, which is a moment in your life so that you become part of a movement after this campaign, I hope till the end of your life. You'll be faithful unto death. So you don't end up fetishizing a candidate or fetishizing politics. You see, no one ballot is going to emancipate poor people. No. That's like thinking all you need is just a tuba, just blowing his note or blowing her note. No, the tuba need the saxophone. Saxophone need the trumpet. Trumpet need the piano. The voices need, it's a collective thing. We're all in this together. And so we have to sustain our energy, sustain our movement building. We're trying to cultivate the intellectual, the spiritual, and the organizational capacity of poor and working people. That's what is required in order to push back the entrenched interests, the myopic perspectives, and the indifference. And sometimes it's worse than indifference. Sometimes it's outright contempt for poor people, the contempt for working people, the contempt of Black people, contempt of women, contempt of our precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters, and of course our precious trans who are just assaulted day in and day out. Well, they made in the image and likeness of God too. They're just as precious as anybody else. And so we have to proceed with this holistic orientation, but recognize that when they become part of the campaign, you know, this is just a moment, just an instance. And so what I'm hoping is that, you know, as we proceed, the kind of work you all are doing, the kind of organizations that you have, they get deeper, broader, more intense, stronger. See, that will be one of the litmus tests of this campaign. If my campaign is strong and you all have organizations that's not stronger than it was before, something is lacking in my campaign. Something is lacking. And that's always been a challenge. Always been a challenge. Because too often, I'm with Ella Baker versus Martin Luther King. And you know how much I love Brother Martin. But Ella used to say, Martin, you got this messianic mode of leadership where you got one person at the top and everybody's looking to them like they Moses. Whereas any strong movement has strong persons in the movement so they don't have to look to one leader. They're local activists who have their own strong forms of local leadership. There's regional activists and so forth and so on. That's Ella Baker, people-centered movement rather than leader-centered movement. Well, I'm with Sister Ella on that. I think Ella Baker, and you all know Ella Baker, she was both executive director of King's organization, SCLC, and executive director of SNCC. And she was much older than Stokely. She was much older than Bob Moses. She was much older than Diane Nash at SNCC. But she was with those young people. She was cross-generational in that way because they were people-centered. And I think it's very important. You always have a people-centered campaign and the people-centered movement. Very much so.
And so in this people-centered movement, people-centered campaign, right, that is focused, again, on working class people and poor people, when we think about especially the Black community, a lot of those people have traditionally been Democrats. They've been voting for the Democratic Party for decades, right? What is your plan, or how do you what is your approach to recruiting and getting the support of those people?
Absolutely. One is that we have to show the ways in which the Democratic Party has simply not delivered. They've talked a good game, but they have not delivered. That when it comes to the plight and predicament of poor people, it didn't come through. When Obama had a choice between Wall Street and the people, he chose Wall Street. Biden was right there with him, you see. And also the relation between the militarism abroad and the poverty at home. Brother Martin used to say the bombs dropped in Vietnam fall in ghettos. They fall in Appalachia. They fall in barrios. They fall in reservations. All of that money for guns, not enough money for butter, not enough money for dealing with basic social needs. And even on another level is the militarization at home of everyday life with gun violence. You see, the militarization of the police. See, we're going to actually launch, and you all are invited, we're going to launch our campaign August the 25th in Mississippi. It's going to be Emmett Till's family is going to be there. But August 25th in Jackson, Mississippi, we're going to have town hall meetings. We're going to have marches. We're also going to be talking about Brother Jenkins and Brother Parker, who was just viciously violated by the police down there. But it's the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer, and it's the spirit of Delta, Mississippi. That's the blues. That's Robert Johnson. That's Son House. You see, we taking it back. The blues is probably one of the greatest humanizing forces in the country. Hank Williams is a blues man on the vanilla side of town. B.B. King's the king of the blues from Mississippi. I won't go into, but all I'm saying is we're going back down there to make sure that the issues of poverty and the ways in which it's been shaped by predatory capitalist processes, profit-obsessed capitalist processes, has not accented the humanity of poor folk, and then the white supremacy that kicks in. And of course, Mississippi, just like Black folk in Appalachia, you say you can't downplay how the two are intertwined. But it's not just about race. It's a race tied to predatory capitalist processes that make it difficult for Black and white people to come together. So anytime you get Black and white and others coming together in the name of something spiritual and moral, the political consequences are just immense. And that's why the powers that be do not want that to happen. They do not want that to happen. And so the Democratic Party has been a party of default for people, because Republicans are just so honest and so candid about their accommodation to greed and contempt. And so one hopes that we'll be able to bring that message to folks. Now, keep in mind, almost 40% of our fellow citizens don't vote at all. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. About 61, 62% of people who vote. And see, I want to get to those folks who just completely given up. You mentioned politics. They say, oh, that's low comedy, please. All these gangsters in politics legalize bribery, normalize corruption. Come on, pass me a drink in the barbershop or the beauty salon. Hey, and of course, not like they're not telling the truth on a certain level, but that does not justify their lack of participating in it. But you do begin based on the truths that they discern. And I'm sure you all see that all the time. It's just very, very difficult to get folk to participate because they've seen politicians sell them out over and over and over and over and over again. How many times will they vote? And when they get in office, poor people become an afterthought. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
I'm sitting here like a student trying to soak everything up. And the thing that I hear you talk a lot about, the spiritual, the love, the compassion, right? In the intellectual rigor, right? But it seems like we're in a world where there are attacks on both of those, right? There's attack on love and compassion, and there's attack on intellectual rigor and the ability to think critically, right? What are your ideas on how we move past this period, how we move through it?
Yes. Well, of course, we begin with a salute to our dear Sister Joan. I'm telling you, because when it comes to acknowledging how love and justice is always under attack, and intellectual reflection, which is Socratic, which is just critically thinking for yourself, that's always a dangerous thing, because any dogma's in trouble. Any doctrine's in trouble. And if that's true, any hierarchy is in trouble. So it's true that we're living in a period where it's intensifying, but you know what I know? With Miles Horton and others were organizing, folk were coming at them tooth and nail, and that's way back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, so that we're part of this longer tradition of people's really holding up a blood-stained banner that's tied to truth, and condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. And it's tied to justice, and we said justice is always tied to a care and concern for people. I mean, I tell folk all the time that any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. If you don't have a deep love and care and concern for the people, you're going to be a sprinter, not a marathoner. You're going to come out of the block so strong talking about justice and discover, oh, this was my brand. Oh, this is my strategy. No, we ain't talking about no brand. We're talking about your cause.
Right.
If it's not your cause, if it's just your brand, you're going to be there for about 5 months, 9 months, a year. Then you're going off into something else. Hey, it's like a jazz musician to show up. I'm only here for 3 months and I'm going back to be a carpenter. Hey, I thought you was in love with your instrument. I thought you wanted to play in the band. Well, not really. I'm just trying this thing out to see how it is. You got activists like that. This is a very interesting thing. Very interesting to be talking to these poor people. Oh my God, this is so fascinating. And then 2 years later, they right back on Wall Street again. Hey, I thought that was your brand. That wasn't your cause. The cause is deep. It's spiritual. It's moral. And you know one thing about precious Black and working people, no matter what color they are, is that most of them know who's for real. Mm-hmm. Most of them know who's just posing and posturing. They really do. And that's what we need. We need folk who are for real, who really care for the people, who would care for the people when they're losing, when they're winning, when they're up, when they're down, when they're in the valley, when they're on the mountaintop. That's why the music coming out of Appalachia. If you ain't real when you're singing, shut your mouth and put your banjo down. Let somebody else come forward who's singing from their soul. That's all. Our politics ought to be as real as poor people's culture, as working people's culture, as Black people's culture, as white poor people's culture, and so forth. You know what I mean? That's that. I think they deserve nothing less than that. And we're not talking about perfection.
Right.
We're not talking, because when I go into folk, I tell them up front, I got a whole lot of gangster in me. I want you to work with me and have patience with me. I had that in Charlottesville. When I went to Charlottesville with some of our very sick white brothers in the Klan, neo-Nazi. You all remember Charlottesville in Virginia? And they come up to me, got their mask on, got their gun ammunitions in their guns. They say, aren't you that person on, the end? Aren't you that end on television calling everybody brother? I said, yes, brother. That's me. I can't stand that. I can't stand that. I said, well, let me tell you something, brother. I'm a free Black man. No, I don't ask for anybody's permission as to who I love. I said, and in fact, Jesus loves you just like Jesus loves me. You choose to be a gangster at the moment. I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivity. We praying for each other. But I'm on a human spectrum, just like you. But you are my foe. You are my enemy. You trying to crush my people. You trying to crush Jews, trying to crush Muslims, trying to crush gay brothers, lesbian sisters, Black folk, immigrants. You lost contact with their humanity. You are my foe and enemy, but it doesn't mean that we're not on a human spectrum. And it certainly doesn't mean that it's cutting off my love. And they looked at me like I had lost my cotton picking mind. And I said, that's right. I want to disrupt you. That's exactly right. I want to completely call into question the narrative in your mind as to what you thought I was like, or what you think I think you are like. You can change. You can be transformed, you see. Look at George Wallace. People forget how George Wallace ended up critical of white supremacy. Nathan Forrest, one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan, got a city named after him in Arkansas, the same city that a genius named Al Green was born in. What happened to Nathan at the end of his life? A critic of white supremacy. He grew out of that Ku Klux Klan hatred and so forth. People change. Malcolm Little was a gangster. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad loved him in a cell. He became Malcolm X, and then he outgrew Elijah Muhammad in terms of his love. We don't give up on people. I hear Sister Hillary and the other Democrats calling the white poor people irredeemables and deplorables. I said, ooh, you really missed the point, didn't you? Who do you think you are? All of this arrogance and condescension and looking down on other folk as if the only folk acceptable are those like your friends who hang out with you in Chautauqua and other places. Come on, Sister Hillary. Shame on you. Shame on you. Are you justifying all of that xenophobia down there in Appalachia? No, I'm not justifying it. And I'm not justifying all the greed on Wall Street or at Harvard and Yale and Princeton either. I'm trying to be morally and spiritually consistent, no matter who the people are we're talking about, because we all stand in need of a certain kind of correction, certain kind of critique in order to grow and mature. And the beautiful thing about it is, once you're having these kinds of very real conversations, it's unpredictable. It's out of your control. The sense of humor, the sense of humanity, you don't know where the conversation go.
Love it.
It's a beautiful thing. Y'all, you may end up singing a song together. You know what I mean? A little Ebony and Ivory song. You know what I mean? Some in tune, some out of tune. That's all right. Just lift your voice because you have something deeply human that connects, and we don't have that. We are losing a lot of that. Now, that's very true. These deep human connections, we really are losing, and that's part of the spiritual decay that we have to be honest about. That's why I call for spiritual awakening and moral reckoning and political realignment that focuses on poor and working people at the center. And we haven't had that in the country in a long time in terms of being part of our conversation. It's just a matter of trying to introduce America to the best of itself. And if America really wants to know what's the best about itself, go to Appalachia and meet some folk. Go to Mississippi and meet some folk. Go to California and meet some folk. The best inside of us. All of us have the worst. Appalachia got the worst. Mississippi got the worst. California got the worst. Appalachia got the best too. Mississippi got the best too. No doubt about it.
I want to ask one that's a little bit off the script, but as someone that has been teaching for so many years, that's been an academic, a professor, been in the academy for so many years, do you have any thoughts on the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action?
Yeah, it's a very sad thing in many ways. It really is. Because people have to understand what affirmative action was about. You had a vicious legacy of white supremacy of almost 100 years of barbaric slavery and another 100 years of Jim and Jane Crow, which is neo-slavery, lynching every 2.5 days for 50 years of black folk. And America had to raise the question, say, okay, you've had affirmative action for the white elites, not white poor, not white working class. For white elites, affirmative action was white. All that time. What are we going to do? That was a question in the 60s. What are we going to do? They said, well, maybe what we can begin to do is just create a program that allows people to gain access to some of these positions that have resources and status. And it was never a matter of being disqualified because everybody had to meet qualifications. But the question was that the pool was so big. And when you look at these schools, I mean, the legacies are almost 1 out of 5 get in. Whose legacies? The folk who have parents. Who are the parents? Not white poor, not black of any color, white elite. So that's you already got. Then you got regions. You want folk from Montana. You want folks from Nevada as opposed to just California and New York. So when they finally got the black folk after 100 and some years of slavery and Jim Crow, they said, well, let's just have this particular program. And as soon as it got in there, the critiques began. So this was a weak tool to deal with barbaric white supremacist practices against black folk. I mean, in 1865, 4% of black folk in the whole nation could read. How come? It's against the law for black people to learn how to read and write. And people say, oh, Brother West, that sounds like you talking about us as the victim. Black people have never been solely victims. We've been victimized, but we've never been solely victims. We just stole away. It was against the law for black people to worship God without white supervision. So we stole away at night and held our hands in the rain. And what did? We raised our voices and sang, swing low, sweet chariot. We created some beautiful songs. We wasn't going to get no black Shakespeare yet because he couldn't read. So all of that genius had to be filtered through the music. Then finally we break the back of white supremacist slavery. And for 12 years, you got a moment in the summer of Reconstruction. Here comes Jim Crow again. So the idea that the court would say, I would hear my brother Chief Roberts say, well, we have to be indifferent to race and its consequences in order to deal with race. How are you going to be indifferent to the legacy of slavery and the legacy of neo-slavery? It's not going to work. To think that somehow you're going to be able to leapfrog over those effects and consequences. Now, it's true that there's been progress. There's no doubt about that. And that progress is real. How come? People fought for it, blood, sweat, and tears. And not just black folk, but the legacies of the Miles Hortons and the John Browns and the Lydia Maria Childs and Ann Bradens and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschels and Philip Barrigan. We can go on and on. See? But it's been disproportionately black folk. Let's just be honest about that now. You know, we got some magnificent freedom fighters among our white brothers and sisters, but they got a whole lot of cousins who haven't got that memo, haven't got the memo yet. I'm telling you, very real. So that it's a very sad day when you get the Supreme Court saying, okay, this one little week tool we had, we're pushing aside. So it's an attack on black folk for me. And the question becomes, how do we come up with better ways of doing it? I think that it was always better to have the issues of class and race together. So you didn't end up with having black folk who gained assets were the children of the black middle class, and white poor is left out, white working class is left out, and especially black poor and black working class left out. You see, and we also have to keep in mind that, you know, it's roughly about 49% of our precious young folk that even go to college. Most of our young folk never set foot in a college, and so affirmative action tied to college is significant, but it doesn't directly connect with the masses of young poor people and young working people. The sad thing is people will use that critique as a way of generating new forms of discrimination in the workplace, even outside of college. And so, and that again, that's another way in which black poor and working people are assaulted, in my view. And so it was very sad. I wasn't surprised, you know. I wasn't surprised. The court has never been a friend to justice for poor people or black folk. For the most part, the Warren Court was an exception, but the Supreme Court has ruled 97% of the time on behalf of bosses against workers. And when workers finally get a foothold in the 1940s, here comes Taft-Hartley. Taft-Hartley again siding with property owners and bosses against workers. The Warren Court was the only court in a significant way that was friendly to black people. Supreme Court had slaveholders on it up until the 1860s. Then they had segregationists on it up until the 1960s. Some of them were members of the Klan. So, I mean, you're not going to get too much justice for black folk if folks showing up with their white costume on the weekend and putting on the black robe on Monday. I mean, that's the Keith Sweat moment. Something just ain't right. You know what I mean? Hey, should we be surprised at this thing? But at the same time, and you all know, as lovers of the people, that we should never be surprised by setback. We should never be paralyzed by despair. There's nothing wrong with feeling down and out and sad and disappointed. That's a feeling, you see. But hope is a virtue. Hope is a verb. And a virtue is a standard of behavior, and a verb is action. So if you're feeling down and out, that's your feeling. We understand. Good God Almighty. But when you fall into despair as a whole way of being, that's a vice. And hope is a virtue. And so you don't want to confuse those two, because what happens is a lot of people feel as if, well, if I'm feeling despairing, if I'm in a mood of despair, then my whole life is one of despair. No, that's not it at all. No way, no. And of course, for Christians, it's all about Friday and Saturday and Sunday. You ought to be almost suicidal on Friday because Jesus been crucified by the Roman Empire. Why? Because he went into that temple and ran out the money changers, and they dragged him and treated him like a criminal and put him on that cross. You ought to be down and out. You ought to be almost suicidal. But then Saturday, the long wait. What's going on All the disciples scared. Peter denies him 3 times. His closest partners got intimidated. Here come Mary Magdalene, sister from the streets. I still think that something is happening in the tomb. Mary, who's in the tomb? I don't see nobody in there. You got to be kidding, man. What are you talking about? Where's Peter? Can't find the mother hucker. Where's John? Where's Simon? Come on, where are they? So that this sense of unbelievable breakthrough. And even if you're not a Christian, you know how powerful the story is because it creates truths about your life, even if you're not a Christian in terms of that particular version of the story. Life is like that. You never completely cave in. Your despair is retail, not wholesale. That your pessimism is retail. We got good reasons for being pessimistic, being black in Appalachia, being white in Appalachia. You got overwhelming evidence of being pessimistic. Keep it retail. You got kids you got to raise. You got struggles you got to engage in. You got institutions you got to sustain. So it's not wholesale, so it doesn't paralyze your soul. It's just a moment of pessimism in your overall project of struggle that's tied to a love and a hope. And, you know, as a Christian, for me, it's love, hope, and faith. But it could be for other brothers and sisters, it's courage. Mm-hmm. It's outright courage. I refuse to be a coward. I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. That's what Mary Ellen Pleasant used to say. You know, she's a black sister who gave $600,000 to John Brown. Mm-hmm. He had the note in his pocket when he was executed for what he did at Harper's Ferry. She used to always start off with her speech. She was known as the godmother of human rights in California. She actually measured. She married a robber baron. He dropped dead. She got his money. And she used that to create all these different places for the poor and alcoholics and others in California, and then created her own businesses. But she was very close to John Brown as a black-white connections, and Frederick Douglass too, black-white. And she used to start all her talks. I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. Oh, no. That's a fresh note. That sounds like that's a blues song right there. We bringing some Bessie Smith on that. We need a little Ma Rainey on that. And Mark would say what? I'd rather be dead than afraid. Woo! Lord have mercy. And what breaks the back of fear? Love and light. That's what breaks the back of fear. If you scared that you love your mama, you're going to make Hercules look like a Boy Scout and a Cub Scout. The love you have is so deep, Hercules got to get out of the way. Even though you're still fearful, that love gives you the power to work through it. And light does too. You begin to see things in a different way. And this is exactly what you all been doing, I think, there in Appalachia. You meet the precious folk, give them a different lens through which to view the world, different lens to view themselves, self-respect and self-regard and self-affirmation. But then they got to have something to love. They got to get outside of their egos, got to get outside of their narcissism. They got to get outside of their hedonism. Something bigger than them, whatever it is, lures them to give them a strength that they didn't realize they had. The thing that they thought was impossible more and more becomes possible. See, that's what love, that's what justice is all about. Very much so. You all knew all of this, bro. I'm just reiterating what you've been living all of these years.
It's
Dr.
good
West,
to hear.
yes, indeed. This has been a pleasure in so many ways. You said you're a jazz man, you're a blues man. You've been hitting us with all the music, all the artists to know. We want to know who or what you're listening to right now, or what you're reading, or what you recommend for us to listen or read right now.
Well, I was listening last night to John Coltrane's Love Supreme. Okay. I think that's one of the great spiritual expressions in not just America, but in the modern world. You know what I mean? Coming out of 10 years of addiction, heroin, wrestling with new love, Naima, Muslim black sister's first wife, now married to Alice, who was self-towering jazz artist, Love Supreme. Curtis Mayfield, I was listening to the day before yesterday. He, to me, is one of the greatest of the greatest. No doubt about that. But then, there's Aretha. And all you got to say is her first name. Aretha. Lord have mercy. And her daddy, born in Mississippi. Aretha, born in Memphis. Memphis ain't nothing but northern Mississippi. Now, I know from Tennessee, I shouldn't be saying that kind of stuff. I get in trouble. I know that. But no, Memphis is a blues town. And the connection with Mississippi is intimate, very, very close. But those are three who I listen to regularly, just especially these last few days. Definitely.
And anything you're reading or that we should read right now?
I was just finishing a book called On Du Bois in the First World War. It's called The Wounded World.
Okay.
The Wounded World. Very much so. Wow.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. West, for spending time with us and being so generous, talking with us for an entire hour.
All right. Love y'all. Love you. Take good care now. Appreciate you.